Hello and welcome. I am Dennis Mabuka, and in this video, we'll be making some title animations. And we'll be making these animations where the titles are kind of coming together and it's difficult to kind of make out what they say until that final moment where all the pieces fall into place. I came across this workflow recently when I was fortunate enough to work on the artwork for this project, this Viking themed project. I'll leave the link down in the description if you want to check it out in more detail. But I got to do some really, really cool artwork, and it kind of read me deeper into the rabbit hole of SVG. And I think I have some ideas for some really cool videos coming soon. So before we jump in, let's just take a look at what we're going to be making. Now, this first part is not absolutely necessary. You can just type in your font inside Blender and start working directly from there. But I just like to use Inkscape because it gives me a lot more ability to customize what my text is going to look like. So here I'm just drawing out what I want the text to look like, and then I'll just draw out some of the patterns that I want to appear on the texture that I'll be using on top of the text. I'm then going to import this SVG drawing from Inkscape into Blender as an SVG and just start tweaking the settings under the curves so that I can have a 3D looking object. So I've already gone ahead and set up this golden metallic looking material. And you can grab this blend file from Gumroad if you want to just dissect it, but it's a very simple metallic material that looks like this. So now that I have this inside Blender, what I'm going to do next is I want to convert this mesh into these curves into mesh objects so that we can manipulate them. So what I'll do is I'll duplicate this object and then move it into its own collection and call it something like curves, and then disable that from the viewport. And then this is what we're going to convert into a mesh. So with that selected, first I'll make sure the origin is set to geometry, and then I'll go object, convert, mesh. So if you go into edit mode, you'll see that the whole object is now a mesh. But if you try and select, let's say, this first letter here, if I hover over it and hit L so that I can select all the linked vertices, you'll see that not all vertices are selected. So what we're going to do is select everything and then hit M, merge by distance. So that just makes sure that all the vertices that are close to each other by this threshold here are all merged together. So if you select that and move, you'll see that it's all selected. And then the next thing I'm going to do is select everything, hit P, and then separate by loose parts. So that makes it so that each of these islands is now a separate object. And then before anything else, I'll just make sure to select them again and then set the origin to geometry so that each of the objects' origins are set to the geometry, basically. So the next thing I'm going to do is I won't be applying my animation directly on these objects themselves. What I'll do is I'll add an empty to each of these objects and then parent each of these objects to their respective empty and then apply my animation to those empties themselves. And I do this because it adds a degree of freedom for me, because I will have the ability to apply animations onto the empty, which will affect the object they're parented to. At the same time, I'll still retain the ability to apply animations onto the objects themselves if I want another level of detail inside my animation. So I'll just Shift A, and then I will add a sphere. and then just move that right there. I'll scale it down, and then I will just duplicate, make sure that each of these objects has its own empty that it will be parented to. And then I'll select the empty, select the object, select the empty, Control P, and then object. And then to repeat the last operation, I'll just select the object, select the empty, and then Shift R. And you'll see that's parented. So I'll just go through doing the same for all the objects in the scene. I've provided the music being used for this intro on Gumroad along with this project file, so you can download those and follow along. And I've also made available on Gumroad this sound pack that has been a labor of love by Manjaro. He's the one who makes the music and the sounds on this channel sound really, really good. So give him a follow on Twitter. Some of these sounds, you've already heard them in previous tutorials and intros that I've done on this channel. So if you would like a small library of sound files that you can be using in your personal and commercial projects, you can grab this for a small price on Gumroad. So back inside Blender, inside the video editing workspace, I've just brought in the audio that we'll be working with, and then I've gone ahead and dropped markers into the interesting places where I feel something should be happening to correspond to the audio. And other than just doing it visually, you can turn on this display waveform on and off. I also like to do it just by listening to it by ear. Sometimes I'll even close my eyes with my finger on the M button. I'll listen going through and just pressing M when something interesting is happening in the audio. So the specific properties that we'll be animating for these empties will be the Y location and then the X and the Y rotation. And specifically these values, because I know by the time the animation is coming to an end, all the objects will have the same values for all these properties. And this makes it easier for me to reduce the repetitive tasks. So with my cursor on the timeline on the last marker that I placed, I'll move into the animation workspace and place a keyframe on each of these properties. So right there, and right there. And just outside of the camera view, I'll then move this cursor all the way to the first frame and then move the last selected empty way behind the camera. Because as you can see in the animation, all the objects are flying from behind the camera and then they hit the view of the camera and the camera flips over to the front side and then we see all these objects flying into their last positions where we now see what the text reads. So I'll place a keyframe just by, with this icon selected, if you make a change to an animated property, it will just immediately drop a keyframe at that point. So I'll place a keyframe right there, and then say I want these objects to have rotated like 5 times. I'll come here and say 360 multiplied by 5, like that, and then paste that in there, just like that. So just like that, I've made changes to the last selected empty, and to apply these changes to all the other ones, I'll just hit Ctrl L and link animation data. So by doing so, all these empties have the same animation data. So if I select this one and say, try to make a change here, you'll see the change is applied to all of them. And that's not necessarily what we want. So immediately after linking that animation data, I'll hit U, and then, which is the shortcut for make single user. You can come to the options here, object, relations, make single user, and object animation, which unlinks that data. So if I make changes, you'll see it's only affecting the selected one. So with that done, if I play this on the timeline, you'll see what happens. I'll move into the camera view, and then you'll see what happens to that animation. So the skeleton of the animation is there. Now what we want to do is move in and finesse. Oh, in fact, before that, I'll select the camera. I'll delete that keyframe that I accidentally placed right there. And at this keyframe, at this marker where I want the camera to flip over from one direction to the other, I'm going to place that animation by animating the Z rotation of the camera. So I'll move just one single frame ahead, place a keyframe right there, and then one frame back and rotate that by 180 degrees so that it's looking directly behind. So if you play on the timeline, you'll see what that looks like. You'll see the objects flying towards the camera. And then at that point, the camera flips over and then they all move into place. So now to randomize this movement, I'll start with the X with the Y location of all these properties. So on the first frame, I'll just grab and start randomizing them just without any formula. I'm just grabbing them and moving them around so that they're all placed not so uniformly. And then there's a trick we're going to use to just make that a lot more enhanced in the final animation. So something like that. I like that. So what I'll do is I'll just hit B, select all those, and scale them in the Y-axis so that the keyframes are moving in the Y-axis and not the X-axis, which means I'm displacing their location in the Y-axis and not in time. So when I have a nice separation that I like, you can see the effect on the viewport right there. When I have something that I like, I'll move them all a bit lower so that they're all coming from the same direction. Something like that. If I scrub through, you'll see what that looks like, which is nice. I like that. And then I'm going to do the same for the rotations of the object. So I'll just grab them, move them randomly. There's a bunch of keyframes here, so I'm just not really paying much attention to the detail. And then with that done, I'll select those, scale them in the Y-axis so that the difference is a lot more pronounced. I like that. And then something else I'm going to do is select the last keyframes and scale them in the X-axis so that the interpolation, by the time they are coming by the time the animations are coming to an end in this final frame, it's nice and smooth and slow. So this is the part of the process where it might take a bit of time and a lot of finessing to just getting in there and massaging your keyframes so that you have something that you like, a nice and appealing animation by the time you're done. And one more thing I'll be careful to do is at this point where the camera flips from one direction to the other, I want one of the objects to hit the camera square on so that I can hide that transition, and it just makes the animation feel a lot more energetic by that momentum of the object from one direction to the other. So I'm just going to go ahead and massage this animation until I have something that I like. And you can grab this project file on Gumroad and dissect it for yourself and see what I did and how you can add your own techniques onto it. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.